Good. Hey, how many of you are not non-Finnish speakers? Non-Finnish. Okay, good. So we can definitely justify using English or any other preferred language. Not that I know Finnish and English, but others might be a bit challenging. But hey, welcome on my behalf, and I'm Petru Soinen from a company called SC5, and we've had a couple of my colleagues also here present a few topics to you in the earlier lectures. And Jarkko here sitting in the front row asked me earlier in the fall, or was it late summer, that would I like to come and speak at an event like this, and then we mulled over the idea, what should I talk about, and then for some strange reason I don't know if I have passion, but I kind of have a peculiarity and an interest in the topic that we're going to be discussing, and also have had a chance to dig quite deeply into some of the stuff that we will be talking about. But let's scope that a bit later. Something about me. Actually, I'm going to try to start with a video, if I can get it to play. Hopefully you can actually hear the sounds. If my computer will comply. Which it doesn't do. All right, good. It might be because of the setup that I'm also projecting stuff to the screen, but what I would have wanted to show you is actually a 5-year-old video of something that actually, does anyone remember an ancient dinosaur called the Nokia N97? A couple of very timid hands raising. Are they good or bad memories? Well, be honest, they might be. They might not be all good, but anyway, kind of guiding us to the topic of today. I kind of got my, or I was thrown to the deep end of the pool on the web application segment when the N97 was launched, and I was working at the Nokia Developer Relations Organization, and our mission was to bring some of the world's top brands to the Nokia N97 device as preloads, and someone had got the amazing idea that we need to develop those applications with web technologies. And Nokia at that time, they had a product called Symbian Web Runtime, which enabled you to write HTML. We didn't talk about HTML5 at that time at all, but it was HTML, JavaScript, CSS code, package it somehow, put it to your device, and everything's going to be great. So we worked with brands like CNN, Facebook, Bloomberg, some BBC, some smaller brands obviously as well, just helping those guys develop apps for the N97 and then again subsequent devices, and also working with some of our consultancy partners to make sure that they know what to do when Facebook comes to them and says that develop this app to us. And well, anyway, so we had to do quite a lot of tricks. The idea is great. I mean, you develop web apps and it must be all fun, and our marketing people were promising that the N97 is probably the best thing since sliced cheese, that it's going to have amazing performance and going to do quite a bit of this and that. And then when we got the device in our hands, we were like, okay, something must be missing. Things are not flying on the screen, and we had to kind of go back a bit and do some tricks to get at least adequate performance, and then again, the feedback on the device and the apps weren't all that positive, but anyway, it was a good learning experience for me and the team on what can be done with web technologies, also outside the web browser as you think of it, and then again, what the potential challenges might be. We're 4 or 5 years past that time now, so obviously a lot has changed, but I think in this talk I'm going to probably go back to those experiences quite a bit. Right. So I talk to the gentleman whose name escaped me asking about your profiles, but who of you are kind of professional developers who, I mean, you do coding for a living or you are architects or stuff like that? Okay, roughly, I guess 40% something, good. And the rest of you, I assume, are developers. Are there any kind of business-oriented people who you probably know something about development, but you don't really touch code? Okay. Jarkko, why are you sitting there not raising your hand? You fall into that mix. Good. All right. That's good. Who of you have heard about PhoneGap? Who has tried it? Okay, good, a couple. All right, we're also going to be talking very briefly about PhoneGap, but it's good to know. Something I want to share to you, and this actually also touches PhoneGap, that today SC5 made our plans of HTML5 conference live. So we're going to have an event on January 24th in Helsinki, focusing around HTML5, multi-screen service development, Internet of Things. So there's going to be actually quite a nice speaker list in the show. Let me try to get my browser up and running since it clearly is not complying, but right. Anyway, if you go to finhtml5.fi, you can check out the speakers. So we tried to get a mix of developers, designers, and also kind of visionaries, future builders. So, for example, I don't know if you guys have tried out the Financial Times web app on the iOS devices and also Windows 8. So Andrew Betts is the mastermind behind the application. He's the leader of Financial Times Labs now that actually keeps developing the product. About PhoneGap, Brian LaRue, who's the father of PhoneGap, the creator of it, a pretty crazy in a good way individual, will also be at the event. Speaking about something at least related, we haven't actually nailed in stone what his presentation is going to contain, but anyway, he's going to be present at the event. Andy is heading the Nokia Maps, or actually now the Nokia Here development in Berlin, so the HTML5 side of things. So he's going to be sharing some of the war stories that they've been facing when developing that service. Then we have Marty Spindler, an Internet of Things person, a bit of a, again, crazy in a good way hacker, Michal Buczynski from Mozilla, who's going to be focusing on HTML5 gaming, most likely in his presentation. Then some business and design folks, Luisa Heinrich, Steph and Brian Rieger, and Philip from Wikitude, who's going to be talking about augmented reality in JavaScript. So quite a nice speaker list, and if you are interested, which hopefully you will be, so please go check out finhtml5.fi and the hashtag. Since you're here, and if you're going to be quick, you could use the promo code to register to the event. So that's going to give you 20 euros off the registration price. All right. There were no business people here, so we're not going to go through the collaboration thingy at this moment. Right. All right. Just a quick question, kind of going towards what we're going to be focusing on. That what are the kind of devices that you guys are carrying with you right now? Who has an iPad with them at the moment? Actually, 3, 4. Other tablet, Android. I'm doing market study, so Android tablets are more popular than iPads. We should tweet about that. That's good. You guys using the iPad, what are the apps that you love? What are the apps that you use? Don't be shy. If it's a game with little kittens, you can tell me. I'm not going to bite. You are being shy. All right. Well, that's good. You mentioned Google Chrome, so what's the kind of, I'm just the one person answering it, but what's the kind of share of you, if you think about how much you use the browser and how much do you use separate apps?
I'd say about 50-50.
All right, that's good. Quite a good answer. All right. But hey, to the topic, so you had a good question about are we going to be talking about, if I say going beyond the browser, are we going to be talking about Node.js? So no, we are not. So we are actually going to be talking about kind of front-end applications and then again how you can leverage your web development skills or web technologies to create content for certain devices. And I'm not going to be talking about code that much or kind of showing you how to develop, let's say, a Windows 8 app, but I'd like to have discussion on why would you want to do something like this, what can you do, and something about how you do it, but most importantly, when you should not do it and when you should probably think of other options than utilizing web technologies. Right, so I think the coloring is a tad bland here, but this is basically our playground that we're going to be looking at. I'm not that big of an artist, but basically you have some sort of a device or platform that kind of is your host device or security domain in the sense, and then you have an application, and inside the application you render some content with web technologies to the view. And so basically we're going to be limiting ourselves to an HTML, CSS, JavaScript front end so that you use these technologies to develop your application. Obviously you're most likely going to be also talking to a cloud component to get some spicing up for your application, but that's not really necessary. And then again, if you think about normal websites where you make a request to the cloud and actually kind of ask for the site or application content from there and then execute portions of it inside your browser. So in this scope, we can also be talking about apps that are at least partially installed through some sort of a package to your host device. So there's some agent on, let's say, for example, on an Android device that can interpret some packages that contain HTML, JavaScript, CSS code that will actually form an application. And those are kind of like you can at least mimic some parts of native application functionality. All right. Yeah, so probably if you ask that why should I do it? I mean, I have native, I have the browsers. Why should I step there? And as I wanted to emphasize that if you do not have a need, if your use case doesn't require you to go this route that we're going to discuss, then don't do it. Then develop a native app with purely technology X, or go purely through the browser, providing a service for your consumers that you want to provide. Right. And then again, if you think about kind of splitting between web apps, stuff running in a browser, and stuff running on some host device. I mean, browsers are application platforms in a sense as well, and obviously they provide quite a powerful toolkit for you to create services, but there might be cases where you need to do something else. I actually run into something sort of, I don't know if it's funny, but it was at least kind of something that caught my eye yesterday. Let me see if I can activate the browser again. This is a good read if you can somehow find it. It's not that long of a write and doesn't actually have that much substance, but it was something that I was picking up a burger at a local restaurant yesterday, and I kind of picked up the story. And now Microsoft, they have IE10, and they have really kind of a strong marketing pitch out there that yes, our browser is probably now one of the most standards compliant ones out there, and now they're concerned about especially mobile web developers targeting and creating their apps specifically for WebKit browsers. And I don't know if the statement actually came from a Microsoft rep's mouth with these words that don't make WebKit the new IE6, but the story was about kind of them crying a bit that, hey, now that we're supporting the standard, please also kind of tweak your apps to make them look better. Yeah, but anyway, for some of the use cases, when you have something that you need to get done, some certain user group that you need to target, and some UX requirements that you need to fulfill, that there might be use cases where you have, let's say, 10 developers that know HTML and JavaScript, and you have a use case that potentially could be implemented with web technologies, but you just cannot do it in the browser due to certain limitations. Then you just need to find some of the hacks that we're going to be talking about today. And again, the world is changing, so the stuff that we're going to be talking about might not be that relevant anymore. But yeah, I guess the most common reason why you might want to be using web technologies to write something that runs outside the browser is that you need access to some sort of a device API that's not there. So you have your normal browser that runs in a sandbox that gives you access to X number of APIs, and that's it, due to security reasons or due to stuff not yet being in the standard on what the browsers would support. And typically, if you wouldn't want it to have access to, let's say, the webcam or some other functionality, you would have to have resorted to using Flash or some other custom browser plugin to actually get the stuff done. And then again, that's not really a standards-friendly or viable approach in the longer term. Flash is a perfectly viable approach still for a lot of cases, but we're not going to be talking about Flash today. But anyway, if you have a kind of a pure HTML5-ish website and you have a use case where you would need to do something else, let's say access the calendar, for instance, you're not going to be able to do it efficiently directly through the browser, so that's why you would need to find some other tweaks. Does anyone have any guesses or any experience? I think a lot of experienced developers here, that what are some of the device APIs that you can access through the browser? I should have said that I might have some bonus points in my back pocket for the most active question. Yes? Yeah, location is good. Any other that come to mind? So location is, I think, the kind of the classic use case because it's so useful in a lot of places that you can spice up a lot of applications. But there are, to some extent, for example, offline, if you are using the, well, even app cache and local storage, but especially the newer file APIs kind of fall into this bucket. Some of the goodies that are popping up in the HTML5 spec that you will be able to use already are able to use through some browsers are here. So I'm not going to actually step through the demos because stepping to the browser in this setup is a bit cumbersome. But geolocation, you mentioned it, device motion, so you kind of being able to understand that how the device is moving, how is it actually oriented, so kind of the sensor APIs as they are called in some platforms. One other example is web audio on how you can efficiently mix and utilize audio on your web pages. I haven't actually played that much with the API. I've seen some demos, but it's quite interesting what you can do with it. jamwithchrome.com, I don't know if you have checked it out, it's a pretty good example of it uses WebSockets and web audio, and you can actually kind of play with your friends or whoever is sitting on the other side of the planet on your normal browser session, and you can kind of pick an instrument, for example, drums or guitar, and kind of the information that comes from the counterparts in the jamming session will be mixed on your browser using web audio. And then WebRTC, which is anyone have a guess what WebRTC, for example, what would be a classic use case for WebRTC? Oh, come on, someone, because I don't want to show the kind of photo booth demo with my ugly face popping up on the screen. But basically, it gives you, for example, access to the device webcam, and then again possibilities to kind of do some real-time communications with that data as well. So stuff are popping up in the HTML5 spec. I don't like the HTML5 word, but they're gay. But basically stuff that you can do in the browser, stepping out of the traditional sandbox of not having that much device access. Again, let's see if we can activate that link somehow. Oh no, I'm not going to go through that, but I'm going to send you the slides and with these links, but basically it's a link to the Mozilla Web API proposal and definition, and there's a bunch of stuff like Bluetooth and idle screen APIs and stuff like that those guys are working on to, at some point, be part of not only Mozilla's browser, but also other browsers, and those APIs to be accessible in a way that is secure and doesn't kind of break privacy regulations. But so a lot of stuff is happening. But basically, right now, if you need to implement a cross-platform app and you want to use web technologies and you want to access, for example, well, let's take the webcam for an example. You need to support Windows Phone, iOS, Android, desktop browsers. You're practically going to have to somehow break out of the browser security sandbox and implement things a bit differently. All right. Another classic thing is push, that at least for us at SC5, a lot of customers are looking for solutions that obviously you need to provide some channel to your users and customers that, hey, here's something new in the app, please come and take a look at me and use me. So that's kind of a very efficient way, for example, to get your users to stick to the service more and use it. And if you're not a hobbyist, obviously that's a way to, at least indirectly, to also monetize your stuff. But yeah, if you think about, for example, iOS, push notifications are like business as usual for any application that has at least some native shell around it. But if you have a website and you want to get more eyeballs onto that site and kind of get people notified that, hey, something has happened, boom, get me back to there. There's no way to actually kind of get an indication when the browser is not running, or actually even when the website window is not running on those devices, to say that something has happened, get me back to the app to get notified. So at the moment, one of the reasons that you definitely need to consider stepping out of the pure browser scope is that if you need some kind of notifications when your site is not running. You need to implement something extra. This is something that I hope that I'm going to get some questions and comments and discussion, but actually something that we ran into quite a bit at Nokia when doing the Symbian web runtime stuff, because well, first of all, this is a screenshot with just Barclays Bank front page, but kind of indicated that, hey, I'm browsing a bank site even though I'm not logged into web bank. And then again, obviously, view source or use inspector to see what's going on, blah, blah. Yes, obviously, you can read everything from pretty much any website stuff that has been pushed to client side. And there are things to obfuscate or make things a bit harder to read. But anyway, anything that is sent to the browser and lives on the kind of is executed client side that can be read and somehow kind of at least people can try to hack it. Right, so then for Symbian web runtime, I didn't, but some people in our friendly marketing organization told to some institutions that, hey, you could just forget the browser, develop this web runtime application that you install to a device. You can still use your browser code base and everything's going to be fine. The problem was that those applications were installed in kind of plain text, human readable format into the device's file system, and if you were able to Google just a bit, you would be able to kind of snatch those files out of the device and pretty much read what's going on in the application. So then if you had some super sensitive data in your JavaScript code, even though it was packaged into an application and deployed to a device, anyone could still read it. And actually, one of the funnier things that we were threatening to do was to publish one of those higher profile apps that we had with a couple of changes that would have probably directed, maybe they're videoing this, so I shouldn't go that far. But anyway, kind of pull a little prank and maybe publish Bloomberg with a different name and some changes to it. But yeah, things where I'm getting is that Symbian web runtime is probably not a good example, but for example, if you think of PhoneGap or some other solutions that for iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, you can deploy apps to, you're at least going to be a bit more on the safer ground when it comes to people directly reading your JavaScript source. I haven't actually studied the situation on iPhone to that extent that could you still get access to the readable source. Probably some way you could, but it's at least a whole lot more difficult than it is to just go to your browser and if you're running something through a website, you can always do view source. That being said, I mean, I think always to any developer, any business owner, you just need to understand that we're doing internet banking, we're doing very super critical apps in the browser, so this is not an issue as long as you know what you're doing. But it's really up to you how you want to do it. Some people just see it kind of safer, that they want to at least have a bit more protection to their assets. Any questions about that? Right. So staying strong off the grid or when you're offline, this actually goes to the device API topic. So there's quite powerful APIs for implementing offline functionality to your web content running in the browser nowadays. So app cache storage, IndexedDB, WebEx SQL to some extent, even the file APIs that you can use, at least in Chrome, they are really powerful. I think they're already file writers, so you can actually kind of quite efficiently control what kind of stuff you do save offline and when you read it. But for example, for iPhone, we're actually looking at a case where we need to understand that can we rely on us being able to store, well, let's say the ultimate use case would be several gigabytes of data from a pure web page to be also usable offline. And most likely for a cross-platform approach, right now we can't. So, for example, I think web storage is capped at 50 megs on iOS. So basically, if you have some kind of requirements that you need to do more than that, or say more than that, you're going to be, or you need to find some alternatives how to do it. So definitely, this is one of the areas that if you have some requirements that you need to really efficiently be using the file system, or offline functionality is super critical to you, you might want to consider wrapping your app into something else than a pure browser app. Yep. Performance. This is actually an interesting area that I think most of you have had kind of personal experiences on how web stuff runs on device X and how it's not performing to the same level as native code, which is perfectly true in some, if not even most cases. But I think one of the interesting things that I came across was how to kind of still use HTML5 or HTML JavaScript implementations, but then also gain some benefits from native side processing and performance boosts. Is anyone familiar with AppMobi? Okay, so basically they're kind of a fairly high-level framework for developing apps to multiple platforms with web technologies, and they provide quite a comprehensive suite of push notifications and payments and whatsoever. And one of the more innovative areas that they have is this product called Direct Canvas at least for iPhone. I don't know, it might be available also for Android. Have you played with Direct Canvas? No? Okay. Well, I haven't actually, I've just looked at the code and took a look at how they do things on the native side and how they bridge the stuff from web to native. But anyway, so they basically offload operations on the HTML5 Canvas API to native side processing, and then again, the 2D drawing is actually done in a kind of a native side control. I don't know that much specifics about the technology, but anyhow, the idea would be that you're not actually, even though you're using the HTML5 Canvas API in your app, it's kind of a purely HTML app, you're still offloading the drawing to kind of a native control or a native container. And I'm going to send you the slides, and you can take a look at the example video that they have put up on the kind of performance boost that they're actually getting with the same code base, just by kind of directing the Canvas calls to actually the Direct Canvas component. So it's a pretty impressive and fun piece of technology, but kind of the message that in some cases it might be, whether it's like really intensive calculations that you might need to do, or let's say a physics engine, for example, could be one possibility that you could offload to native. But finding solutions where portions of your app runs in the web view control and portions of it runs on the native side, with still only leveraging kind of JavaScript calls to execute the stuff. Does anyone have any good other examples of similar solutions or something that you've been hacking on yourself? All right. Okay. Something else that we've also now been battling quite a lot with the rise of Windows 8 is that Microsoft is saying that for Windows 8, if you think about the tablets or the desktops, and they have a kind of a design language and an idea on or a very heavy favor on the look and feel of the applications that they want to have. And they're saying that yes, you can publish apps that have an UI that doesn't resemble the kind of overall look and feel of Windows 8 or doesn't respect the settings charms or search boxes or whatsoever. Yes, you can try to deploy that to the Windows Store. Most likely it's actually going to go through, but they're not going to promote it. And I think there are similar examples from other application stores. So kind of one of the reasons also for your service might be that it's just a mock-up or kind of a screenshot of a Windows 8 Metro influenced template that with the message that yes, all right, it's very easy to make your site to at least partially look like Windows 8. It's not a great example to that extent, but you get the point that it's employing the same design flavor. But for example, in Windows 8 or the Windows 8 look and feel and the transitions and UX paradigms, the enablers to create similar experiences purely in the browser are not provided to developers. So if you want to kind of really shine on a specific platform and you still want to use web technologies, you might need to resort into some of the custom web app models that these providers have. So for example, Yle is something that we did develop with HTML and JavaScript, and then again kind of quite aggressively and heavily using the Microsoft UX framework, and then again the whatever search boxes and everything. So it's not that we couldn't implement the same functionality and at least partially the same look and feel in the browser, but we wouldn't have the promotion from Microsoft, and obviously Yle wanted to have a presence in the application store as well, which kind of gets us to the next point that probably I think alongside push and getting access to some native APIs, the presence in application stores is at least among our customers one of the main reasons that why don't you want to implement just a kind of a standalone website? So their competitors, they have apps in the App Store. They at least think, I don't have stats on it, that they think that everyone goes to the App Store and everyone tries to get their services from there. So they want to have their stuff packaged in an application, even though there would be significant advantages in some cases if the service was deployed through the browser. Advantages and limitations, always a trade-off, but I think it's a very common reason for a lot of developers that why they need to package something done with web technologies into apps. Right, and then I think at least now still some of the money-making mechanisms are tied to having your application or service run somewhere else than the browser. So for example, again, I don't really like it that I need to say iOS that many times, but on a popular mobile platform, if you want to do in-app purchases, you can't really do it efficiently without the user having quite a lot of interactions and separate confirmations on the way if you run stuff through the browser. Whereas you get a special prize for that. Yeah, but whereas if you have a kind of a native shell around your app, obviously there are tons of ways, or kind of, it's not tons of ways, but it's that simple to do in-app purchasing to possibly monetize your application more. Obviously with pure web applications, there are a lot of ways. You can use SMS payments or integrate PayPal or integrate banking, but if you again consider the mobile use case, that some see an advantage in in-app purchases being a whole lot simpler, that you just get a dialogue that, hey, do you want to buy a pack of virtual popcorn for €3? Yeah, sure. Versus you getting some sort of a interface, whether it's PayPal, or you having to send a confirmation SMS separately to a service and then coming back to the site. But anyway, could be one reason that you might want to consider not running your stuff through the browser currently. Right. So anyone else have any other areas? This is not an exhaustive list. It was just a bunch of things that we have run into on what the potential reasons could be for you developing a web app and not actually running it in the browser.
One of the most important reasons, at least for us, when we were doing or trying to do packaging up to that or web-based app to the mobile, was that limitation of like internet connectivity or the speed. We had to like put a few hundred megabytes of data to the inside to the app, since most people wouldn't want to pay that much for accessing it like with weak connections.
Yeah. How did you? So did you say that, or did you mean that in the initial load you push like hundreds of megs?
Not really.
Or during the.
But at least you could have the offline version of the full
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So I think it goes back to kind of how efficiently can you actually have a completely or partially offline app that actually does a lot of things. So as I said, that to some extent it's possible, but for example, the 50 meg limit in web storage, that if you were working with a customer now who wants to implement a digital reader and they have kind of newspaper products that are roughly 50-ish megabytes, something like that, and they say to us that, hey, we want the user to be able to kind of store their whole archive also on devices. But as I said, that it's not just feasible at the moment to implement in a wide enough range of browsers. All right, but anyway, I can share you links later on that there's a lot of work going on to remove these barriers that we did talk about. Right, so then again, obviously there's the option of going all native, developing something for every platform, and that's a great approach if you can do it, and if your use case dictates it, by all means do it. It's in many cases the best solution. But this is actually something, I don't know if any of you came by the story, but Christian Heilmann is I don't know what his title is at Mozilla, but basically the most influential person at their developer relations organization. And he writes quite a lot in his personal blog and also at Mozilla Hacks, and tweets a lot as Code Poet. So he just wrote a piece on HTML5 myth busting like 2 weeks back or something, and I don't know if it was at least indirectly targeted to also Mark Zuckerberg's comments or the other discussion that's going around in the industry. But this was quite a good quote that I picked from it, that yes, obviously you can do a whole lot more with native apps, so it's kind of more like a tailored suit. But it really comes to the equation that does your use case really need that kind of super performance or super fine graining, or the use cases that you cannot do with a web app, and what are all the places that you actually want to push stuff. So I don't want to be ranting that much about native versus web, but that's just a good quote that I came by, and definitely a guy that you should be following, or not saying should, but he's an interesting person. Right. Hey, cat animation works. So as I mentioned, that a gazillion use cases where you just go native, and a lot of use cases where you go web. So there is room for all. And reasoning on web, that I think one of the things that we're preaching quite a lot to our customers also is that even though the process of kind of updating your stuff that you deploy to certain application stores or marketplaces is getting a whole lot easier, there's still the process of you creating the update and actually your users having to come to manually download it. So obviously one of the greatest advantages of a pure web approach where you're either running stuff in the browser or your web app is wrapped in a way that you can dynamically update the scripts and styling and HTML structure, at least partially. So I think that's a great advantage that you can control when and where your application is being fixed without the user actually having to do a whole lot more than just probably a reload of the page. As for example, Trello.com does it, that when they have some new features deployed to their web service or website, they just notify that, hey, we pushed these and these new features, now you can do this and this. Just reload your browser and everything is fine. Write fewer times. I'm not going into the pipe dream of saying that you're going to be able to write everything once, but HTML at least gives you a better opportunity to reuse your code. And then if you take a look at a lot of the stuff that is happening in the internet, how much innovation is going on in the JavaScript space, that it's just, there's a lot of stuff that you can reuse, and a lot of developers obviously that know the technology to at least some extent. All right, so to discuss some of the ways how you can then use some HTML, JS, and CSS content in your apps without going to the browser. So guess what's the first example? I like the text here. Fair pricing, no bullshit promise. But anyway, kind of the idea that probably the most simple use case is that you have an app developed with some technology, whether it's a desktop application running in a Mac or a Linux or Qt app running in Linux, something like that, whatever. You might have blocks of HTML, for example, advertising. There could be some other cases that you would have I heard about the US presidential campaign that some applications that were related to that campaign at least kind of were these hybrid models where most of the fancy stuff was done in native, but then again the dynamic stuff, like for example one UI getting blog entries or something like that would have been done in web. So that's another example of sort of a simple hybrid model where you take some web content into the app. It's not difficult. On some platforms, again, you can just go back to this model and have a web view employ a certain portion of your screen within whatever technology you're actually using for the rest of the service. This is a funny case, LinkedIn. They actually, for iPad, I think their app is almost completely HTML. Not going to say HTML5, but almost completely developed with HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, and wrapped into a package that you can deploy to certain platforms. On the iOS, they're doing some pretty crazy things. Obviously, we don't have access to their code base to understand completely what they're doing. But this is the quote that I picked up from Kiran Prasad on discussing about the LinkedIn iPhone app, that everything else is native, everything else is HTML5 except the scrolling infinite lists, that if you go to the screen on the left, that you would be scrolling through your news feed or whatever, and the stuff that just keeps auto-populating. So due to performance issues, they decided to have a native implementation here. But then again, the other screens and most of the other functionality would be rendered inside a web view control. And obviously their implementation would would be in HTML, JS, CSS. That's a good story as well. You just go read it. He's a very, very smart person. Then your way of kind of doing everything yourself. Do you have an idea that, okay, I want to have a browser or a web view interface in my application and do something crazy with it and kind of implement use cases X, Y, and Z with it. So obviously the way to do it is that you are in your programming environment, whether it's Qt or Mac on desktop, even some Java environment somewhere, and you say that dig me a browser control or web view control, and then think about what kind of bridges do you actually need to native code, and does the environment provide you helpers for that? For example, Qt provides a very powerful bridging interface that you can kind of expose objects from the native side to JavaScript and use them efficiently, and vice versa. In some other environments, you might not have anything else than just kind of sending commands to localhost and back and kind of implementing a solution based on that. Obviously, you can have total control of what you do, but the risks are quite substantial. I like this screenshot for two reasons. One is the team logo on top, which you're going to beat me up because I'm in the wrong city. And the other is that we had something to do with this stuff. But anyway, kind of taking the previous example of you building everything from scratch a bit further, now we come to PhoneGap and the guys that you have an idea where you want to develop a web UI, logic with it, use some popular JavaScript libraries, for example, to get things done on your app, but you don't want to worry about actually kind of how to roll up the whole thing and how to implement the interfaces to other services or device APIs. So lots of different frameworks obviously exist, and they provide similar, yet in some cases a bit different models in how the applications actually are structured, and then again what kind of abstraction they actually provide. So how much do you need to do yourself if you want to implement, for example, in-app purchasing in your application. So this is just a snapshot of the available ones. Does anyone have any other hybrid app framework that you have used and it's not mentioned here? Okay. So you mentioned having used AppMobi. Is it? Did you do something commercial with it or just?
I kind of didn't use it, but was looking through it.
Okay, you knew that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they seem to be marketing their stuff at least quite aggressively. And AppGyver, if you're not aware, they're actually a Finnish company, but the guys, at least the core guys, I think they relocated to San Francisco like a month ago or something. But hopefully they'll be getting some traction on that as well. Right. Then continuing, we again come to the ancient monster, Symbian Web Runtime, which has been, if not dead, at least close to death for a couple of years now. So basically, kind of, I don't know, special cases, but taking things a bit further from you having a hybrid framework that you utilize to build an application that uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So kind of runtimes that are readily baked into some system so that you can actually deploy web apps to a device. So, for example, Symbian Web Runtime, WAC, which is quite a WAC name, and it's actually dead now, bought by Apigee, Opera widgets. So these are examples that they provided an environment and documentation and APIs that, hey, we're going to be living automatically on these and these devices, and this is how you package your web app or web content to a zip package, rename it, and deploy it to a device that has some sort of an agent or an installer actually enabling you to install stuff. These particular examples are probably not the greatest success stories. I don't actually know how Opera Widgets are doing right now. Are they still promoting them? I don't think so. VAC was supposed to be quite a hot topic. I know that there were really strong operator backers on the concept, and for example at Nokia there were quite tight requirements on what had to be done to the devices to make sure that they support VAC, so that certain operators would actually favor Nokia devices as well. But I think the problem, at least now going back again to Symbian Web Runtime, was that the idea was magnificent and everything, but I think they always, or Symbian Web Runtime was always kind of treated like a second-class citizen. That you couldn't really, there wasn't that much investment, or you couldn't really get like support from the platform side to actually get friendly enough user experience for the users that it could be made sustainable. So they're not really, didn't fly that much. Now going back to something that's kind of cooking quite hot right now is Windows 8. And then some other examples that we see here, that kind of platforms or environments that actually promote these web applications as a kind of a first-class environment. So what kind of differs these from for example, Symbian Web Runtime and some of the others that I showed on the previous slide is that web technology is really promoted as a kind of a first level citizen. You have probably a special UX UI framework that you would be creating apps to these environments with web technologies, and you might have some special performance boosts or access to the widest range of APIs available on that platform. So they're kind of more tightly integrated into the platform than the previous ones that I showed. So if you're not familiar with the two latter ones, so Tizen is a Linux-based platform developed by Samsung and also now licensed by a couple of others, and they, to my understanding, they're betting quite heavily on the success of Tizen, so we'll be deploying those devices in the near future to the market. WebOS was something that Palm invented or brought to the market, and then Palm was bought by HP, and Palm devices are not shipping anymore, but it was actually kind of the first real web app development environment for mobile devices that was gaining a lot of traction. And now obviously Windows 8, that you basically have an option to develop with JavaScript to create full applications there. But I think the problem, I don't know if it's that much of a problem, I don't know how people take it, but still the promise that yes, you have a cross-platform technology with web code to develop something for a specific platform. That now again for Windows 8, I think you just need to kind of balance that. Do you have a reason to actually, how much do you want to invest? How do you kind of see that it's worthwhile to adopt to their UX model and their security model and kind of take full use of the usability paradigms that they actually have, meaning that your code that you develop is not going to be, it's not going to be able to be run in different environments. So I don't know how to treat Windows 8 in the sense that should it be favored or supported or not, but I think it comes down to what your customers are asking from you and what you should be doing. But it's not a kind of a drop generic web code here and it's going to run beautifully in Windows, so you need to do some tricks. So something I actually added this slide quite late, but kind of the model how you bring content to those app environments that I just discussed is that mostly they rely on you providing a bunch of files in a folder structure and then probably in many cases zipping them up or using some other build chain and actually creating a kind of a installable package that has a bunch of assets that you actually want to take to the device. And then you might be talking to the cloud to obviously use some cloud services, or in some cases, if it's possible, you could also probably go get a part of your implementation, the scripts from the cloud, and inject them into the application. But there are exceptions and kind of very hybridish models on how this is done. So I think one of the funkier models for packaged web applications is what Nokia came up with, Series 40 web apps, so kind of for these really low end, not really low end, but kind of lowish end devices that are kind of a bit below what we think of smartphones. And Nokia has a product or a proxy browser product, kind of like Opera Mini, that basically when you browse stuff, the content you get to the device actually gets treated by a Nokia proxy and gets compressed and kind of you get data savings and some acceleration in the speed of how you're browsing it. So Nokia came up with the concept that okay, we want developers to develop web apps also for S40, and we have a proxy-based environment. So there was a funky model of actually executing JavaScript partially on the client side and partially on the server side. And even though you had to kind of package your application separately, so this is my hello world, zip it, deploy it to the store, and you would think that, okay, here's a physical package, it's actually going to be deployed to the device when someone installs it. But how this model worked was that actually the app, your code was deployed to the Nokia cloud and executed from there, despite you had packaged it yourself. So there are different models, but I think the most common one, definitely, if you're not running it in the browser, is that you package it separately and deploy the assets to the device. All right. So we're getting quite close to the end, but just a couple of things that are cooking. I don't know how heavily at the moment, but kind of digging deeper or trying to utilize the concept of you using web stuff to actually create apps that can access pretty much everything are Firefox OS and Chrome OS. So basically both of them providing models that essentially the browser, or at least the web engine, is kind of the playground where you create services. And then you have a bunch of APIs and different security models, how things would go about it. But I'm not going to dig deeper into these. You might have read about the initiatives and how they're doing. And actually Firefox OS, I don't know the schedules. Do you, Jarkko, remember when the first devices would be shipping
next year
on top of that platform? But it's actually going to be quite interesting how they play it out, how much they're going to be different, or they're going to be different, but how they are going to kind of avoid the same pitfalls that, for example, WebOS ran into. But I think they have quite good operator backing for the OS, so it might look good. Chrome OS, I'm not that actually keen on looking into the OS itself, but more into how the Chrome application ecosystem will pan out. So now if you take a look at the Chrome browser, it has obviously this App Store model that you can deploy your services there and in some cases utilize or ask permission for the application to utilize a bunch of extra APIs that you cannot utilize in the browser. And then you think about well, Chrome and actually both also Firefox swimming themselves into different host operating systems like the iPhone or Android, and I would think that they have some agenda that they actually kind of want to take this ecosystem of their browser-based apps and payment methods and stuff like that to the host OSs as well. But I've understood that, for example, on iOS, getting the Firefox marketplace and the kind of Firefox application model to be available for consumers, it's going to be practically impossible until Apple kind of raises some of the restrictions that they are employing at the moment. All right, but yeah, actually some of the stuff that I talked about just now, that without looking at, for example, Firefox OS or Chrome OS, so more likely a lot of the services in tomorrow's world are going to be built using just a direct browser interface, whatever platform you're actually running upon, and the stuff that we talked about more device APIs opening up and the offline capabilities opening up more. So I think the browser is going to be a whole lot more powerful, obviously, in the next few years. So some of the reasoning and some of the hacks that or some of the reasoning that we gave on why you should step out of the browser now, and some of the hacks that you need to do, they're probably going to go away. All right. That was about an hour. That was my last slide, and I am happy to take questions and comments. I'm going to leave this here, because if you want to ask about HTML5 and utilize the promo code to join our event,